All right. So I am going to start now, and I'm going to announce that.
Okay. I don't even know what we're talking about.
This is literally just like I'm going over the basics of how you get occultism to work in general. I have a bullet pointed list that I'm going to go over, and at the end of every bullet point, I will have a question and answer portion. So I guess it'll just be you two, unless other people
Okay,
join.
I will be your Brian Callen.
Okay, so I'm going to start now. Overall, this is going to be self-contained, right? I don't think I'm going to have to go over as much groundwork necessarily because it is just you two. The intent of this is really not to just give you my models on everything and have the intent be that you're just going to use what I've told you like ready-made. The intent is to give you a bunch of data on these topics so that anybody can use it to refine their own models to do whatever they want to do with it. This is really just meant to be like a grab bag of general techniques and ideas that should give a general framework of how you do these things. That would be bullet point 1. I assume there's no questions about that. Okay. 2. Magic is the science and art of causing change in conformity with will. This sentence essentially entirely encapsulates the whole process and what you're trying to do with active magic. You're just trying to cause changes based on what you want. So by this precept, any successful action is a magical action on any level. So me picking up this can of water here is a magical action as much as summoning an Enochian Aether. And that's because on a basic ontological level, the necessary factors are the same. That's why this definition is used. Questions?
I suppose you can say in the form of magic, it's necessarily a magical action to decide to do something because there is still a magical connection between the physical body and the soul, as opposed to when you're doing genuine magic, you're doing something that's separate from the physical body.
That would be like ceremonial magic, yes. And there are obviously various gradations of like minutiae related to this, but as a general rule, this is the case. Obviously, you go more in depth to explain how these things happen, why they happen, and how you can make them happen with the various models and symbol systems. So, bullet point 3, if all the questions are done with that, I assume. Okay. To get any kind of ceremonialism to work at all, this is inclusive of meditation. You have to be able to focus the awareness, which is the faculty of consciousness and intentionality itself. So intentionality is expressed by directing the awareness at various things. I'm expressing intentionality to speak right now. You're expressing it to listen if you're listening, and you express it to look around at various things. Though that would be intentionality. I'm going over that concept quite a bit because it's kind of central to this. So what you have to do to get these things to work in general is while you're doing them, you have to focus with single-pointed awareness on what you're doing, which means you have to have exact focused intentionality on the exact thing that you're trying to do and not allow that to waver at all from what you're doing. This can include, wavering can include anything from an itch on your body that you think about to a second to thinking about what you want out of the right for the entire right, which if you do that, you probably will fail entirely because the faculty that runs everything, essentially the engine of power behind everything, is this single-pointed awareness that establishes the link necessary. Let's just use that because it's a simple term, as well as providing the impetus. So the way that you would train this faculty directly and the way that you can kind of test your own expression of it as well is dharana meditation, which I've probably talked about in text chat before because it is perfect for this. But in short, dharana meditation is exact focusing of the intentional awareness upon symbolic forms within the mind's eye. You would begin with things like colored geometric shapes. It doesn't really matter what they are. And you would hold them in the mind unmoving, which means unmorphing, unshrinking. You can't have the color change. Nothing about it can change. Absolutely nothing about the mental picture can change, which is very difficult. But if you can achieve that level of concentration on the mental form for about 15 seconds, that's sufficient to make most ceremonialism work. If you want to continue on with that kind of meditation, what you start doing is moving forms that don't change from their exact like shape and movement. So you would begin with something like a simple pendulum. And you don't necessarily need to go that level for magic, but for mysticism you do. That's how you access most of the higher mystical states, is through further refinement of that sort of faculty. So this does not exactly explain, and I want to go into this a little bit with this, but there will probably be another one of these on this exact topic, because this is a larger topic in itself, but this does not exactly explain the ontological material process that makes everything material, spiritual, blah, blah, but like material in simple terms, process that enables any of this to work, which in short is the panentheistic interpenetration of all phenomena, which is in Tantra the principle of Purusha, in Kabbalah it is the principle of Kether, in Thelemic symbology it's Hadith, same in Egyptian, they just lifted that straight from Egypt, but essentially it is a singular thing that is the same everywhere but also present everywhere. That would be that point that you see people talking about very often, and this is very much related to the single pointed concentration necessary. Yeah. But this is the basic root of all spiritual phenomena and ability. It's really in truth the root of all phenomena in general, but specifically to our discussion here, it is the very specific root of the various clairvoyant and magical faculties in expression, transmission, and reception. Everything about it happens through that. All right, questions. That was a bigger one, but that's kind of the part that people don't understand about it.
I would just like to ask, just kind of not a question, kind of just like
Go ahead.
Expounding on it. The method by which you have to deal with magical phenomena, whether it's demons or angels, etc., is, and the focus specifically, it is very similar to dealing with wild animals, right?
In many cases, yes, with the unconscious elementals, but the more conscious spirits are often more intelligent than humans. So that's not always true.
But the principle remains that if there's a bear charging you and you run away from the bear will eat. And in the same manner, if there's a demon charging you and you run away, the demon will consume you.
Right. That is exactly the way it is with demons. And to get specific on that issue, the issue most people run into with demons isn't even really that, where they're like so in fear of it that they do what it wants. It's more they already want to do what it wants because they found some demon that preys on their own basically Freudian psychoanalytic insecurities. So they want it. It's like a weird spiritual BDSM sort of shit that ends up happening. It's not good.
Kind of like the dichotomy between 1984 and Brave New World. The best way to subvert someone is to make them want your subversion.
Sure, and that is exactly what most manipulative spirits try to do, in fact, which is probably something I'm going to talk about a little bit here in this next portion, which I'll advance on to now.
Who the fuck added
you got what? Okay, what's the question?
It was chunky.
Yes. Okay, so the imagination and creativity is the direct expression of the neshamic faculty in the kabbalistic model, which in simpler terms is actually the soul. That comes directly from the creative nothing of the Tao or Kether, filtered through the prism of your highest self, you could say. So the reason that the terminology used for things like the Ishvara or the holy guardian angel or the higher self, blah, blah, is really kind of bad terminology is the intent is not to have you think that there's any one thing that it could be, because it's going to be different in your case. The individual genius or eudaimon is different in every case, and it will manifest differently in every case. And having very specific and in-depth symbolism around it actually prevents that from happening more so than not, because it gives people a God form to focus on rather than learning their own soul, if that makes sense. The reason this is relevant to the ontological link between imagination and What did you say? Imagination and... Okay, imagination and visualization is because the prism that I mentioned before is essentially this highest potentiality. So the white light of Kether, or the, undifferentiated principle, filters through this prism, and what's unsuitable to this Neshamic form is unsuitable to you in general, and what's suitable to it is suitable in general. So, and this is a natural process that's happening all the time. So part of the reason that lodge initiates in systems like the AA or the Golden Dawn practice the Bournless rites so much is in those systems it's specifically used to try and contact this higher genius or eudaimon, and getting a very clear prism that's not dirtied by anything is entirely necessary, both for your full creative force to come out and any sort of magical expression, transmission, reception, blah, blah. So I hope that answers your question.
Like a literal prism?
Sorta, yeah, actually, but metaphorically.
Okay. For a second there, I was like, I gotta go buy a prism.
No.
Fuck?
Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next point now. Spirits are, in practical and simple terms, manifest and controlled via the means of the previously mentioned directed awareness or will. Their exact mode of existence varies per spirit, right? So they're not all the same thing. I'm not exactly going to go into what they are very specifically, because that'll be like another one of these, because that's a big topic. But so essentially the focus of what I'm trying to talk about here is how you control them. So you control them through the single pointed awareness. You can essentially apply pressure to get them to do things through emotional, intensity, if that makes sense. That's in a way why Major was using the analogy of a wild animal before, because you have to use emotional intensity there, essentially, to not get attacked. So the specific method is intentionality directed at the spirit, charged, let's just use that as a simple term. I know that's a new age term, but charged with desire or will, which is the actual instructions, and then the emotional intensity as the actual impetus here. So, and I will say, in a lot of ways, that sort of emotional intensity is the impetus as well as the single-pointed concentration. However, most people try to get the emotional intensity without being able to get the single-pointed concentration, and the single-pointed concentration is more necessary and also much harder to get than the emotional intensity. That's really easy. You can even just manufacture that with drugs. Yeah. Another easy method of controlling spirits, and a basic facet of their existence, is polarity in terms of active or passive, which is pretty well modeled by the yin and yang. So usually what's done to get spirits to manifest or summon them is you get a lot of things that are like them symbolically, like iron nails for a martial spirit, or gold discs for a solar spirit, or all these various symbolic factors, because like attracts like in the simplest terms. In this way, it makes it easier for the thing to manifest. You can, however, go by the opposite means of doing it. It's a little more intensive, but basically nature seeks homeostasis, and this is true on every level. That's why if I remember correctly, this is even one of Newton's principles, but I don't remember, so don't quote me on that. So if you create a lot of negative polarity of any type, spiritually speaking, in an area, if you allow it to seek homeostasis, that system that you've made, it will very quickly and powerfully attract the opposite. So usually this is used by Taoists, magicians, pretty much exclusively. It's kind of hard to do this with the other elemental models, because in the Western elemental model, as an example, except for fire and water, the other elements are mixed. It wouldn't really work well with this, because you need a very clear polarity. But what they'll do is they'll through various symbolic and ritual means, summon up a bunch of yin force to then get a bunch of yang force in the resulting spirit, or vice versa. So that's another thing that can be done with this. And it is accurate to think of these kinds of things as like electrical or magnetic phenomena in general, or just systems seeking homeostasis. All right, that's that section. Questions about that? It's really not even that complicated, the control of spirits, except for, the theoretical aspects. It's really just the emotional intensity and directed will. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yo guys, come up.
Don't do this. You're not doing it. I'll brown you. You're browned. You're done. It's happened. Who said that? Who did that? Was that Akka? Oh, Akka, I hope divination is nice to you. All right, so what was your question? Sorry. Yes, very much. I would say that the practices influenced each other even. Buddhist Tantra and Taoism have had a complex history because they have been present in the same areas for a long time, specifically China even. But their history is marked by a lot of sect warfare, basically. They've at various points tried to exterminate each other. They've at various points burned each other's knowledge. So there is some cross-pollination between such things, but it's not very extensive because they hate each other on the level of their model, if that makes sense. Like, it's a very intense and hundreds of years long dislike that they both have in the area. So yes, it is similar, but
I have a question.
Give the context there.
So you said the model used in Taoism could essentially not be applied to Western belief.
Not easily, no. So one way that you could try to do it is if you study geomantic symbolism, they actually use an active and passive model in relation to the four elemental model. And you would likely be able to use geomantic figures for this purpose because you could very exactly choose active and passive to get a precise polarity with this. So you could do it in the Western system. It just really hasn't been done, and it would require a precise application of the theory.
Wouldn't the Gnostic belief or Aristotelian material versus spirit also work in terms of the differentiation?
Yes, but that is used more generally in every system as the impetus that provides the theophany itself, if that makes sense. So that polarity between the material and the spiritual, or the unenlightened and the enlightened, is the whole deal. So yeah, but that's used in everything, if that makes sense. And that the complete culmination of that sort of union chemically would be total enlightenment, or beyond a state of Kitharian awareness, or single pointed awareness of all things at all times, all the time, in all aspects at once, forever. That it would be beyond that, basically, which is not something that I have been able to do, even at all. So that's not easy. Stuff like that. All right. Does that answer your question, though? If not, you can kind of continue.
Yeah, kind of. Okay. I was more just asking specifically if the methods used, because in yin and yang is essentially the identical to Saturn and solar, it's just different names and slightly different assignations. Would that not theoretically?
Yes, but solar and Saturn have more attributions than just active and passive. But in what you're referring to in the resolution of the Saturnian and the solar is actually what happens when you raise dot kabbalistically from the position of Tiferet to the position of dot. I guess it's not raising dot, but you're raising the ruach specifically, which is the faculty of conscious awareness or intentionality, from your singular perspective into the multifarious non-dual perspective, which is dot. if that makes sense. So the Koran's on thing that people fucking like do all this cringy shit over, that is really just you looking in a mirror in a very literal sense. You have to smash the mirror and let go of your individuality to be able to see the whole picture. But yeah, I hope that makes sense. So that is actually what you're talking about there, though, is why I go into that, because that is very specifically a union of Saturn and Tiferet, and yeah, anyway, Saturn and Soul and blah blah, lots of terms. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next bullet point then. Number 5, the symbologies and models of the various schools. So why do we use the various symbols? Why are the various signs used? Why are the models used? Well, specifically in active magic, the various signs like pentagrams, hexagrams, that sort of thing are used not because they have inherent validity, although they do on some spiritual levels, which are not the highest levels, by the way, but they channel the directed awareness and the directed single-pointed awareness and the emotional intensity into a form that essentially gives it coded directions in a form itself, if that makes sense. So the pentagram is a model of the Western 4-elemental model with spirit active and passive at the top, and it's always been used and symbolizes control over the elements. That's why you use it to control spirits. And it doesn't inherently do that, but it does that because it speaks to your unconscious mind in such a manner that if you fill it with the intentionality and the emotional intensity, it will do what it says it does because you are making it do that. It's look at it like an empty form that you're giving life, if that makes sense. That's what all the symbols are. They don't have really inherent existence beyond specifically kabbalistically, they would have neshamic existence on like an archetypical world of platonic forms kind of thing, which is like a level of spiritual existence, but that's still dual. Which means it's not real. And reality is a useless term actually in this, but it's less real than the non-dual stuff, the dual stuff. That's essentially that, but I wanted to go over that because I don't think people really understand that. I think people think that the symbols have inherent validity on a non-dual, like really, really, really true kind of level, and that's not what it is. There's just like dead homunculi that you bring to life with your awareness that then do stuff for you. I think I get
what you mean. Like to God, right? The nature of 3 dimensions is just nonsense, but to us, it is the reality. So to the whole,
sure,
it is untrue, but to the subject that is actually inside of it, it is necessarily true.
That's right. So the only truth that's true on every level is the Tao, or a creative sort of nothing. If not even nothing, it's just not fathomable, but it does create things because we can see them and experience them. But yeah, so like our life world experience, to use phenomenological terms, which is just our basic like experience of living in the world, is, as we all know, not true on various scientific and mystical levels, but it is still true on the level of our experience, and all the various things that are true there are still going to be true there, if that makes sense. So truth becomes entirely contextual when you understand these matters properly. It loses any sort of overarching like meaning, and it becomes to have meaning only in specific contexts. The same is true of negation. So yeah.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that all truths are like that, because you just say the truth about the truth that is necessarily true, right?
See, I guess. So, I mean, that's like the whole nothing is... There is no, like, I don't know. You get what I'm saying, I think. But yeah. It's a like endless like recurrence of like screaming I into the void, talking about stuff like that past a certain way.
The best way to simplify it is like subjective versus objective. It's kind of like that, but a little bit different, right? So to an individual in the universe, whatever they believe is true subjectively.
That's relatively
But to the
correct.
universe is a subject to God, right? So what the universe believes is true to the universe, but it is not necessarily true to God.
I would agree that's a good model for it.
One of the reasons why, for instance, murder can occur in the universe. That's not a true aspect of God, but it is an aspect.
You can go over all kinds of stuff like that, and people have. I mean, there's like very extensive justifications for all those kinds of things in the various esoteric systems. But I will move on to the sixth and final point. So, the combination of everything that I've explained in this 101 lecture is entirely sufficient to get most forms of basic ceremonial magic and even advanced forms to run. The more advanced forms will require understanding of the symbolism underlying them, but overall these principles hold true regard from bottom to top in the whole business. The essentials are the eidetic empiric spiritual union with the panentheistic God principle, or Tao, Atman, etc., which is also known as Samadhi or Gnosis, these various things. Single-pointed concentration, which is necessary to achieve the former thing, and is referred to as Gnosis by people like Pete Carroll, who have abused the word, unfortunately, even though this is a very useful concept. They have changed the usage of Gnosis from its historical use and kind of confused it. And from there, you need will or desire, which gives the instructions to everything else or directs it, if that makes sense, which is necessary for both of the things before it. You have to have the will or desire to do any of these things in the first place. The ideal sort of will or desire here is a very, very specific form, though, and this gets into what you've probably seen endless amounts of people, even very stupid people who have no understanding of these matters, talk about, which is lust of result. Specifically, the issue with lust of result is that your will or desire, so specifically this happens on the level of intentionality, actually, but you want your specific desire or will to be unconsciously fulfilled perfectly, ideally. So models for this would be playing sports well without thinking about it, playing a video game really well without thinking about what you're doing. All these various things that are achieved perfectly without thought. This is the necessity, well, not necessity, but the ideal for magic. And the farther you go away from this ideal, the less effective the active magic will be. This is true for mysticism as well. But you have more of an opportunity to realize what you're doing with mysticism. With magic, it goes by pretty quickly because you're just doing rites and you won't really notice what you're doing most of the time with this if you're not careful with it.
So something that I think is important about this is the reason why it is the thing that you want to strive for in magic is because in a state of flow, which is what that is when you're playing sports at a very high level.
I was going to use that as an example too. Anything that provokes a flow state is a good example.
The self essentially disappears, and all that remains is your intention. So you are,
which then executes itself perfectly.
But you are also becoming the creator. Solely the creator. There is no more self, right?
Sure. I wouldn't necessarily say you become the creator, but I would say that you become a perfect vessel for whatever it is you're trying to do.
The archetype of the creator would be more appropriate, but that's pretty much all I wanted to say.
Sure. And essentially, that explanation of lust of result is what I wanted to go over mostly with this point, because the issue of what will happen is if you're thinking of, this is the most usual mistake. Someone will do a rite magically for a purpose, something that they want, doesn't matter what it is. And during the rite, they'll be so excited thinking about how it's going to be so successful, and they're thinking about all the awesome, amazing things that they're going to get, and they're channeling all their intentionality into the wishful thinking, not the actual rite, which invalidates everything and makes everything pointless if you do that. So don't do that. You have to keep your intentionality, which is the very precise faculty of directed concentration of the consciousness, on what you're doing in the rite. It has to be on that, otherwise the faculty will be wasted and you'll accomplish nothing.
Something that kind of aligns with that point as well is another error that people make is celebrating the thing that they succeed at.
Ideally, you want to forget what you did right after you did it.
Yeah,
that's the ideal.
You want to act as if it should always have been, as if it was always going to happen, and it did happen, and it has always happened. Right.
So that's the lecture, basically. That is the how you get ceremonial magic to work 101. I'll probably do more of these on various other topics, but this alone should be enough to get someone to kind of be able to do what they want with it and maybe refine models. Who knows? The people who really need to hear this wouldn't listen to it, so anyway, thank you for coming, everybody. You're all great. I'm gonna. Well, Chunky said he recorded it for you.
Yeah, thank you, Chunky. Thank you, Chunky.
So, yeah. All right. Goodbye. Have a good day to all of you.